Easy game bookmaking. All you need is tickets and chalk. Change the prices, take money and win. Done our dough, chaps. We've done our dough.
Patronising attitude.
That's unfair. I would see betting shops return to laying bets as opposed to being mini casinos.
A very warm welcome to this Bar Steward special, where we're going to be discussing about the current white paper release that's due soon. And joining me to chew the fat on this show, two very important guests on this debate. First of all, it's Geoff Banks, online bookmaker. Welcome, Geoff.
Hey, Lee. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. And very pleased to have him on the show. It's the first time he's been on our pods discussing the SCV affordability problems we've been going through. It's Regulus Partners, Dan Waugh. Welcome, Dan.
Thank you, Lee. Pleasure.
Yeah, two distinguished guests to discuss the surrounding issues. And Dan, I'm going to come to you first because basically this seems to me now we're at the point where something's clearly going to get done and it's going to affect a lot of people. But you seem to think that the Public Health England have been a little bit disingenuous here.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about the public health establishment's sort of assault on the betting and gaming market is that it's so dishonest. And if it is true, as they say, that gambling harms are widespread in society, or even that gambling is inherently harmful, it seems odd that they have to make things up, particularly given the amount of money they spend on producing their research. So we've seen that in the last year and a half with first the Public Health England report on the economic and social costs of gambling harm, and then the follow-up from the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, which is what's assumed Public Health England when it got binned in 2021.
Right. So have you actual evidence that this is taking place?
Yes. So we've recently completed a report, a critique of the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities in Public Health England cost estimates. It's available if anybody wants to email us and get a copy, but it's a little bit complex, and I'll try and make it as simple as possible. The way that Public Health England and the OHID did these reports is quite complex, but I'll try and keep it as simple as possible. But in September 2021, on the very last day of their existence, Public Health England published a report which claimed that the economic and social costs of harmful gambling in England were 1.3 billion. In January this year, the organisation that replaced them, OHID, revised these estimates, and they replaced that 1.3 billion estimate with a choice. You could either have 1 billion or 1.8 billion, depending upon how fast and loose you like your statistics. These are also the reports that contain the much discussed suicide figures. So Public Health England said 409 suicides each year were associated with problem gambling. OHID said it was either 117 or it might be 496, which is rather precisely imprecise, if you ask me.
I mean, this is some mistake to make, really. They seem to have, going back to COVID times, but they seem to sort of fabricate statistics to create a sort of a bit of a false environment, if you like. And we're seeing this more and more with health authorities, etc., etc. I've read a report by the Samaritans that have actually said it's actually impossible to attribute suicide to any single one cause. So this, again, when we look at statistics, we have to have a robust set of data that backs this up. And I don't see anything robust about these numbers that keep getting peddled out. Geoff Banks, coming to you. I mean, this is a massive concern, isn't it? Because we talk about the statutory levy, which has been obviously muted and said that this could be happening. If the statutory levy happens, it's going to be all these academics, health professionals that want a grift. They're going to be there with begging bowl out, aren't they?
Lee, you're talking about a staggering amount of money that these so-called academics, and I do say so-called because, of course, the only research that they do is into the harm that they claim that gambling causes. They're not interested in the 30 million people who gamble in the United Kingdom, a very developed gambling nation. People are well experienced in gambling, and they're not interested in the 30 million who experience absolutely no harm whatsoever from their gambling. They just enjoy it. They like a bet. They'll have bets at different times in the year. Some will bet in the FA Cup, some will bet in the Grand Nationals, some will bet on the lottery. But whatever they do, they do it well within their control, well within their auspices. They're not interested in those people. They're not interested in doing research on the positive health benefits of gambling. And the reason they're not interested in any of these well-known factors, these acknowledged facts, is because it doesn't pay their wages. one needs to understand that this whole attack on gambling is led by a very small group of people. And if you look at the interactions that they have, the videos that they produce and the Twitter things that they produce, how many people actually engage or are interested in anything that they have to say, it is minute. But it appears to me that an important body of people that are interested in what they have to say are politicians. And this is purely down to inexperience from the politicians themselves, because today's politician is all about minority thinking. We've seen that in the whole transgender debate, and now we see it in the gambling debate, that politicians are bamboozled by extreme minorities making an awful lot of noise. But let's be clear on one thing, and the whole gambling debate is about money. How much each academic trousers from gambling, how much these so-called charities that seem to find nobody to distribute their money to, how much they trouserly as an industry. And they are an industry and they are self-serving. And if you look at the wages that they're getting on their annual company reports, they've all doubled. They're all doing extremely well. And the reason why they don't want gambling industry to have an input into where their money is being spent is because they don't want any research whatsoever on the positive health benefits of gambling, and there is compelling evidence. And I would throw it over to Dan, he's an acknowledged expert in this degree, to basically explain to you why they ignore the positive health benefits of gambling and what impact that would have to our society if we allow at this time these people to have control because of their narrow, self-centered views.
Yeah, thanks, Geoff. I would just say I agree with you a lot on the whole point about the grifting. There are some very good charities who do some very good work. So GamCare and its network providers, Gordon Moody Association, those are at the hard end who are dealing with people with disorders, doing very difficult work and doing it with great energy and honesty. So I think those on the front line tend to be very good, and I would defend them to the hilt. But you're right, there's a vast hinterland of other organisations that seem to sort of cream money off the top that should be going to treatment providers, and that includes a lot of very bad researchers. I think why they ignore the benefits, it's because the benefits are inconvenient for their view. The mantra that's developed has been that gambling is the new tobacco. So what they want to show is that gambling is an activity that's inherently harmful, because once you show that, then you can discount any benefits and you can pretty much do what you like to the punter, because you consider the punter to be a victim rather than an adult displaying choice. So they ignore the benefits. The Gambling Commission, when they reviewed the Public Health England report the first time round, said that actually the benefits should be studied, but they said it would be politically awkward for them to do it. And they also said that they would be critical of any gambling industry funded attempts to examine benefits from gambling. So you've got a situation where the regulator says it's politically awkward for them to look at it, which is a strange thing for a regulator to say, and then say, so therefore the only ones who can do it are the industry, and we won't believe them if they produce it. So there's definitely a bit of a skew to their thinking on this. It should be pointed out that the Gambling Commission didn't actually publish that view. We had to extract it from them under Freedom of Information Act inquiries. Going back to the suicide point, the Gambling Commission has also said that the Public Health England and Office for Health Improvement and Disparities suicide claims, this is the 117, 409 or 496 deaths a year, are unreliable. But again, they didn't publish that view. We had to get it out of them under Freedom of Information Act request. So we've got some very dishonest research going on here. And the Gambling Commission is kind of colluding in this.
This seems all very odd, because the Gambling Commission, since coming into power a long time ago, since handing licences out for betting exchange shops where you played in running, etc., they were regulating this part, all of a sudden have moved heavily onto gambling harm. And it seems to be a real heavy focus on that and nothing for nothing else. It's gambling harm, money laundering, AML. And apart from that, every punter that enjoys this sport can go to IBAS at the moment, because, as we know, Big Corp are taking a lot of advantage out of punters in terms of getting the money. They back a winner. They want to see more documentation. And this is not a healthy position to be in. Are we creating a cartel even? Is that what the Big Corp want? A cartel of Flutter, Entain and Port Vale wanting to own the entire industry and scare off competition, Geoff Banks?
It certainly worries me, Lee. You make a very valid point there. I believe it's 50 or 55% of the market is controlled by three huge gambling empires, and 80% of the market is controlled by just 10 of those companies. All of them are based offshore. All of them are centered in the black market. They're capable tomorrow of turning off the UK tap and returning to themselves to Gibraltar-based companies exclusively and having nothing whatsoever to do with the regulated market. They're capable of doing that. And when you get that kind of situation, Lee, you see an unreasonable control on the gambling market, including, for example, them volunteering how much they're going to pay in levy. Of course, those kind of things will impact smaller independent operators and land-based casinos. For example, the costs that they're planning to pass on to us will be disproportionate because, as you know, a company like Bet365 with 35 million customers has huge economies of scale. Whereas when you turn around to much smaller companies like myself or Star Sports or Fitstairs, those costs will be absolutely disproportionate to the level of potential gambling harms that we could possibly create. Into the bargain, companies, for example, such as my own, which do not operate gaming at all, are very low on the gambling harm scale, but yet treated in exactly the same way and therefore likely to be levied in exactly the same way. And of course, from the punter's point of view, and I think we've seen it in some intelligent videos this morning I've seen from Australia, from the punter's point of view, these companies are able to enforce on the punter restrictions on their betting, restrictions on them taking bonuses and these kind of things, which are absolutely unprecedented in the industry. They have enormous control because, of course, their ability to dissect you as a customer, especially electronically, which is part of the reason they have kept such a very quiet profile with regard to invasive affordability checks, because it has suited them commercially so to do. They can profile people as they have never done before and filter out anybody that has the potential, regardless of whether they're winning right now or not, from actually having a bet from them. And they have enormous power that way. I've always struggled to understand why they don't represent their customers, but I think the reason they don't represent their customers' views, is because they don't care about customers anymore. There's no longer that interaction between the sort of John Banks and the Colin Websters and the Roy Christies and the William Hills and the Joe Corrals with their customers anymore. Nobody gives a shit about that. It's just a faceless entity. They know they're unpopular. They don't care if they're unpopular, and they don't care if they are pushing punters into the black market. It doesn't make any difference to them. At the end of the day, they probably are a notable beneficiary from anybody that does go to the black market because they control so many companies.
Geoff, just one further question on sort of Big Corp. Why do you think that they went down the affordability route long before the Gambling Commission publicly came out and said that checks should be done, etc.? I refer to my own case nearly 2 years ago now, where my account was suspended and I had to send in my financial data, which I did, and I was reinstated. But only after I went to the CEOs and the solicitors that have said Corp, I got my account actually returned. But they were doing this a long time ago. So when people say, oh, what's he on about, cartel, talking rubbish? But to me, that's where I come from, because why would you do it before any kind of regulatory body has intervened on this? They were already doing it.
The Gambling Commission are not interested in the commercial business of bookmakers. Sorry, let's not call them bookmakers. They're gaming companies. They're not interested, and they don't have the expertise to regulate the industry right now. That is apparent in affordability checks that have little to no impact on problem gambling levels in the United Kingdom. This is just a measure of relevance to them as an organization. So they have never evaluated or tested anything that they do. These invasive checks are not evaluated. They're not tested as they're supposed to be before they are incepted on the general public. And it is clearly their wish. They have been going on since 2018 or 2019 that affordability checks is coming. Clearly, Paul Scully intervened last year to sort of say that he was of a different view to the Gambling Commission at that time, and they've had to back down from that approach, but they are driven by affordability because it makes them relevant as an organization. They have increased their funding exponentially as an organisation. As Dan will be able to tell you most expertly, the level of money that's coming into the Gambling Commission is way more when it was incepted. But the Gambling Commission is not interested in the commercial activities of bookmakers. I don't want to talk about the football index saga because I think people were a bit naive about that. They locked onto a Ponzi scheme and everybody appeared to be doing extraordinarily well. And at the end of the day, they lost their money because they were just a little bit stupid. When something is too good to be true, it is probably too good to be true. But the commercial activities of bookmakers is something the Gambling Commission barely, if not absolutely totally, do not understand. For example, as a commission, fundamentally, they do not understand how companies like Entain, like Flutter, can commercialize the data that they receive from punters to make them exponentially far more profitable as units. The Gambling Commission don't understand this and don't seem to care how this will impact consumers, because consumers are not a concern to the Gambling Commission.
Coming back to you, Dan, do you have any faith in the regulatory body or, for that matter, DCMS that are obviously going to release the white paper soon, which will be back for another show, I've no doubt. But do you have any hope here that we're going to get a compromise or a solution that's going to help the normal punter?
I think everyone's focused on the white paper because we've been waiting for it for so long. But the white paper is really just a staging post. And if the press reports about the white paper are true, then I think what DCMS will have tried to do is, having started off with a fairly ambitious agenda, if you look at the original scope of the call for evidence, I think they've realised this is all too difficult and are just trying to extricate themselves in a way that perhaps achieves some overdue modernisations. I think having caps on online slot machine stakes is a long overdue reform, for example. On the flip side, some of the land-based operators have been sort of stuck in the 20th century, and they're hoping for some positive reforms as well, like being able to use debit cards. But at the same time, I think the DCMS will try also to appease some of the anti-gambling forces, and probably the big one there is what we've been talking about, the implementation of a levy, which I think, if we're not very careful, will end up being a fund to ban gambling in Great Britain. And lest that seem a little bit hysterical, it's worth bringing us back to our friends at the Office for Health Improvement and Disparities and Public Health England, because one of the other reports they've published, which was in August last year, they published a list of 81 recommendations for the government to intervene on gambling. Some were okay, some were even so okay they already exist, so they weren't new things. But other things included a ban on in-play betting, a ban on spread betting on sports, a ban on all gambling advertising and sponsorship, including in horse racing, a ban on the sale of alcohol in racecourses, bingo clubs and casinos, and a ban on the number of customers who are allowed on a website at any one time in particular.
Wow.
But perhaps the craziest one, and people may well not believe this because it is so outlandish, but I promise you it's true, and you can even look it up because it was published in a journal called The Lancet Public Health. They proposed plain packaging for all gambling products. And when you looked up what they meant by that, it's defined as being a ban on all trademarks, images, logos and colours. So a deck of cards under these public health proposals, you would no longer have the Queen of Hearts in a deck of cards. She would have to be something like 12B. So this is how zealous and slightly unhinged a lot of these public health people are. And that these are sorts of acts of cultural vandalism, really, that they're looking to impose. And they're doing it dishonestly by making up numbers in the first place, in the words of Matt Hancock, to scare the pants off people. Taxpayer-funded studies to produce manufactured estimates of harm, which are then used to justify the most draconian government interventions you could think of.
Yes. This, for me, though, I have a little problem with this narrative at the moment in that we're all agreeing. I'm going to be devil's advocate and say, right, there are people that suffer harm genuinely from being rinsed by bookmakers, as we've seen in the past, people that have really had their lives turned over. And what I see, though, now is the solutions proposed are absolutely useless. They can be circumvented by any gambler suffering from harm, addiction. They will find ways round this current system. I know, sir. I speak to people that have suffered gambling harm on a daily basis, and they tell me what I need to do to get round it. Without going into that, the current solutions, everyone's a panic. Right, we need to do something. What? We don't know. When surely there's got to be an answer. You either do nothing if you can't solve the problem, or if you can solve the problem, the measure needs to be brought in, not this current one. This is what I'm trying to say. It will not work. It will not help anyone. The same as the academics coming in on the grift, which we know is very plausible right now. And this is what I'm concerned about, that the industry is going to get completely rinsed, but from the wrong angle. Already the word betting is bastardized. If you're in betting, it's a terrible thing. If you play on the stock market, that's fantastic. I've said before to Geoff, I can deposit 25 grand on IG and play the spreads, play the CFDs today, tomorrow on a credit card. It's ludicrous. It's classist. It just doesn't make any sense to me. I try and understand the logic from all parties, and I try and take it on board. But Dan, what are we saying to people that genuinely have suffered from harm? They're not going to get help under the current measures being proposed.
So I think I agree with you. The issue, I think, is that the regulator, governments, campaigners and the industry themselves are all guilty of trying to suggest that there are these silver bullets that can magically tackle what is a really quite complex psychiatric disorder. We're talking about gambling disorder here rather than this more nebulous term of harm, which I know you had Steve Donahue on a few months ago and talking about that at great length. If you want to try to reduce the amount of harmful consequences from gambling, or if you want to stop people getting into gambling disorder, there is no one thing. There's no one big thing. You have to do lots of things that are based on intelligent thinking and real understanding of the problem you're trying to solve. And you have to do lots of things and you have to coordinate them. So there is always more that can be done, but it's generally the case, these big things like affordability checks and things like that, on their own, they will not achieve very much. And actually, they're likely to cause a lot of harm, we want to use that word, to recreational customers who suddenly find that their choices in their life are not their own anymore. And the politicisation of the problem means that actually you get people like Ian Duncan Smith entering the fray. He's obviously a very experienced politician, but he's not known for his intellect. And he starts proposing things like tracking every gambler in the country. So under Ian Duncan Smith's proposals, everybody who wanted to buy as much as a lottery ticket in Great Britain would be required to submit themselves to state surveillance of their bank accounts. That is what he has proposed 2 years ago. So we need to somehow sort of depoliticize this and get back to really intelligent, people working together rather than trying to ban gambling. Actually think about what is the specifics of the problem here and how do we tackle these things intelligently. But that's not where we are. And public health people, they simply see banning things as the answer to everything. So they're not just after gambling. So they're after beer as well. Wine. They want to ban alcohol. They want to ban betting and gaming. Yeah. They want to ban pizza. They want to ban all sorts of things which they think are harmful to humans. And there's a bit of logic in that. But to be honest, by the time you get to the end of it, there's not a lot left that's not banned anymore.
It is a contentious point, but it's deserving of being said openly, of the potential problem for hundreds of thousands of vulnerable gamblers being shunted into the black market. This is something that one should absolutely avoid doing. And yes, measures and controls on the regulated market should be seen to be working, but one should never drive an agenda that can send anybody to the black market where they can use credit cards to deposit, where there are no deposit limits, where there are no timeouts. Nothing like that exists in the black market. And I certainly agree as an operator, we should do everything that we can to detect people that are betting with us, betting overnight, frequency of deposits, change of deposit, funny numbers that people deposit sometimes that can give you an indication, for example, that they are down to their last resources. For example, somebody that deposits £23.61, and we have seen it. We actively approach that person to find out why it is that they deposited that amount of money. Is it because they're trying to make up to a £50 round number? But more likely it's because they're down to the last few pounds. And in such an incident, we approach our people to make sure that they are protected, they have an opportunity to talk to somebody, and we can offer at least some solution, some kind of protection, some kind of reasonable approach, which includes all the various tools that we offer on a website like ours, deposit limits, timeouts, these exclusion orders, that basically will protect an individual from going too far, from going from something that's fun to something that's no longer fun, that's potentially life-threatening. One should avoid absolutely anything that would drive anybody towards the black market. I believe when I hear, for example, a last point, when I hear the Gambling Commission marginalise the effect of the black market, saying that it can't quantify it, it's of no importance, it doesn't stop them regulating thing, I think that's a totally irresponsible point of view of a regulator to make such statements when the black market represents a clear failure of regulation, because it sends the vulnerable people in exactly the direction which causes them the most harm.
What is the threshold there, Geoff? This is an impossible question, because the threshold at the moment is generalised, as in you've got software like you've just highlighted, £23.61 deposit, but that might be just because, well, that's what I've got left till I get paid tomorrow. There's no harm. But coming back to me, on a previous pod that I said with you, I actually did this. In 2005, I remortgaged my house. I took $50,000 out of my house to bolster my betting bank on a bad run. No problem for me. But like you said, if your company knew about that with maybe a soft credit check, you can probably find that out. Well, I don't know. But if you knew I'd done that to fund the account, you would, that's it. No, you're out. The threshold's very difficult to tell, because you could have someone that works at McDonald's, they're on, I don't know, they might work even part-time, it's £1,200 a month, something like that. They might do £800 in a session, which most bookmakers might think, well, you know, people lose £800 in a session in an afternoon's gambling. It's just how it is.
You're never going to stop people from gambling who enjoy having a bet. You're just not going to stop them. There is no, I'm not an expert on psychology, but my experience for over 40 years in gambling is you don't stop these people from actually betting. But what you can do as an operator, and what we do try very hard to do, is to at least communicate with them, at least give them, I believe, for example, that the major gambling companies with so many adverts dedicated to people, a pause, an intervention in people, making people think about having that extra bet when they're on a bit of a bad run. I believe such kind of marketing, that kind of messaging is extremely powerful. And this is exactly why we are at 0.2% problem gambling levels, which is an impressively low figure, a figure that, once again, the Gambling Commission marginalised. Why? Because it doesn't pay their wages when the gambling companies do their jobs well. And in the main, I believe, actually, for all the ills that entain and flutter and the embarrassment that is caused by companies like William Hill being so obtuse and not intervening with people when they do lose £30,000, £40,000. But at the end of the day, one has to say that they have been remarkably successful in keeping the problem gambling levels down to where they are. That is an impressive number. That is actually something that is deserving of praise. If one listened to the media, if one listened to the rhetoric that emanates from the Gambling Commission, one would imagine that as an industry, we are failing notably in our duties to our customers. Well, I don't believe that's true at all. The recent William Hill fine, which contained a number, 10, I believe, incidents of where William Hill should have done better. We are, at the end of the day, talking about enforcement that took place back in 2021 that they've only released just before the white paper, a record fine as well. This is a gender-driven, politically driven Gambling Commission deciding to release that information right now. In those days, as Dan will explain to you, I'm sure, the regulatory environment, just even a couple of years ago, was completely different. The requirements and operators were completely different as to what's happened in the last 2 years. And that has not been excusing what William Hill did. They don't behave as I believe my company behaves. We do our absolute level best to keep a careful watch on what our customers are getting up to and looking after them, because at the end of the day, if they lose too much money to us, if they get in too deep, they are a non-customer. We will never do business with them again. We have lost them for the rest of our mutual lives, and that is not a good thing. It will never be a good commercial decision to lose somebody because you win too much off them in a 2-week period. It's stupidity. One wants to do, like Guinness and like any other product, is to do business with customers for the rest of their lives. and to do business at a level where they can afford it. I don't want to lose a single customer that way. So we do our jobs, as far as my company is concerned. We do it assiduously. We do it as best we can. We contact the people. Not everybody wants to contact us back, and I understand that. It's not an easy job. It's something that the Gambling Commission totally ignores. They expect us to be able to communicate with people, most of whom are not interested in sharing their data with us, not interested in even communicating with us. But at least we do the best that we possibly can in intervening with these customers. That's why I argue the safest place for the gambling pound is in the United Kingdom regulated market. Warts and all, it's the best place for anybody to be.
It is, as long as you don't stop people withdrawing the winnings.
We don't do that, Lee. We have never done that, and we don't do that. If people request to withdraw their money, they get paid the same day, or if it's a very late night withdrawal, they get paid the next morning. We don't do things like that. I totally agree, actually, with the Gambling Commission when they say one shouldn't use responsible gambling measures to delay payments to customers. People deposit money with us. They're entitled to get paid when they win.
So you'd think there'd be some kind of enforcement measures on Big Corp for doing this, when the Gambling Commission have even said in the literature that they cannot impose these measures to stop withdrawals. And this is a disgrace within the industry. It's not fair towards punters. Dan, I'm going to come back to you, because the future of the sport, really, I think you've sort of intuited that this could be the end of racing. If things happen as we think they could happen, is there any kickback or fight back here?
So under the plans that the Department of Health announced, which included the ban on colours and logos, yeah, absolutely horse racing's gone, because you've got no sponsorship. The children aren't allowed at the races. Alcohol's not allowed at the races. I think it's a struggle to see what happens to horse racing under that model. So yes, it's existential. And I think the other thing is that Christopher Snowdon from the Institute of Economic Affairs wrote something a few years ago, which I thought was very interesting. He wrote, the thing about public health is they never tell you the final destination. They only tell you the next stop on the line. So I think what we are looking at here, the public health establishment does want to ban betting and gaming in this country. The Gambling Commission is colluding in that. The Gambling Commission has to preserve the National Lottery, so it's a bit conflicted there. But the National Lottery has colluded with the public health establishment on this. But it won't be this week, it won't be this year. It's a long-term move. We know this because in one of their press releases, which the Gambling Commission then covered up, the original draft of the press release, the Public Health England said we want to treat gambling the same as tobacco. Well, the plan for tobacco is to stub it out in this country by 2030. So when you start saying we want to take the same approach to betting as we do to tobacco, that is a statement of prohibitionist intent. So absolutely, unless you think horse racing can survive without betting, we should be very, very worried about this. Can we push back? Yes, we can push back. And actually, to be honest, racing is about the only sort of body that is doing anything to push back on the Gambling Commission and its public health cronies. So we've seen a very strong pushback from racing, most notably, I guess, in the Racing Post, but also in other places. And the response to that, the Gambling Commission has definitely backed down. So I think what we see with the Gambling Commission, also with public health, when they come up against a strong opposition, they will back down. But we've got to see more of that. We've got to see more engagement with customers, because customers may find that their activity is taken away from them. So there must be more thought to how you get the voice of the punter heard in these debates. Because to Geoff's point, at the moment, it's a very small elite which is driving gambling policy, and it's driving gambling policy to a place where something they don't enjoy doing gets banned, and it makes them feel rather good.
Did you see I think it was highlighted, once again, I suppose it came from the Guardianista, that the three clubs that have come into the Premier League collectively, I don't know, Fulham was one of them, I believe. I'm sure somebody can educate me exactly what the number is, but they have lost collectively £178 million in coming up into the Premier League. Now, what worries me about all these banning people, or let's ban advertising, let's ban marketing, and of course, I'm an advocate of sensible controls of marketing on the gambling industry. But what happens to not just clubs like Fulham, to clubs like Barnet and Stevenage and cricket clubs and everything like that have depended so much? It's not just racing. that depends so much on the gambling dollar just to survive. If these Puritans get their way, what happens to our whole way of life? If you support Wraith Rovers, if you live locally to a club like Wraith Rovers or Watford or these kind of clubs that don't enjoy massive sponsorship deals with TV companies and the like, what's your future if, as the Puritans want, that the important tap of money that comes essentially from consumers into your pocket via gambling is simply turned off to suit their agenda? What happens to all of these sports and clubs if we do that?
Well, I agree to an extent, but what I will counter that with is it does concern me the amount of gambling advertising on TV during football matches. The reason I say this is because obviously children watch football, and this is a problem area for me, that half-time gambling ads before the game. The players walk out in shirts. There'll be a big corporation in the electronic advertising around the pitch. And to a degree, I kind of get this point of view, because let's be fair here. There are things like on YouTube. I watched something today, Chipmonkeys it's called. And basically these are crypto slot people that go on YouTube. They aren't regulated. So, well, they're a UK business, which is incredible. They're registered in the UK. I've checked them out on Companies House. And basically kids can watch that. There's no age gate on, no nothing. They've been going a while. So they encourage you to play in crypto, and they show you how to do it, to go and register via a debit card, which 16-year-olds would have. This is where the GC, for me, need to tackle areas like this as well, because they rubbish it off. They've been told about this and they've said it's nothing to do with us.
Lee, sorry, we're talking, I've heard this expression, normalizing gambling. When you see adverts for Bet365 or Ladbrokes on some baller's jersey or around the pitch and these kind of things, that we see the anti-gambling lobby saying, oh, that's normalizing gambling. But let's look at the adult population in the United Kingdom. And I don't know how many adults, probably Dan could probably tell us how many adults there actually are in the UK out of 68 odd million people, but 30 million of them have a bet. Whatever they do, however they bet, 30 million of them choose to have a bet during the course of the annual year. That's a compelling number. And now this isn't because they're driven necessarily by some footballer wearing a Ladbrokes thing. It's because of something they want to do. It's the same as if it'd be all very well if we worked out how many deaths we got from alcohol. Nearly 10,000 deaths, nearly 17 million addicts created by alcohol every year, nearly 500,000 hospitalizations every year in the UK. But nobody's talking about banning alcohol. Why? Because as a society, we enjoy alcohol. We need it. It adds meaning to many people's lives, even if it causes harm. So I hear all of these arguments about, oh, that normalizing gambling and it's terrible, and, oh, we're going to create a nation worth of addicts. But that's not actually true. It's got no foundation whatsoever. In fact, 30 million people bet in this country, Lee, because they enjoy it. There is a tiny element of people that go too far. And we know about these people, and everybody would desire that we look after them as best as we possibly can. But bottom line is 30 million people choose to bet every year. What's wrong with that?
Absolutely nothing.
One of the interesting things about most of the hysterical claims about gambling is that people never stop to examine the facts and the statistics. And if we look at participation by children in gambling, it has declined from 23% of children had placed a bet or gambled on something in the prior week in 2011. Last year, it was 7%. So gambling participation by children has collapsed in this country. And that is during a period where shirt sponsorship increased. So in 2011, when you've got a very much higher rate of participation in gambling by children, I think there was only a handful of shirt sponsors that were gambling companies. And over the time that increases, the proportion of children gambling decreases. We also know from the 2020 survey, and this is the only survey the Gambling Commission has given us the detail on, but if you're a child in the 2020 Young People in Gambling survey, and you said that you had seen gambling advertised or sponsorship, you are less likely to have gambled than somebody who said they hadn't seen it. We also know when you get into actually you look at what children do gamble on, hardly any of it is illegal. 5% of children gamble underage in this country. 31% of children gamble on something, but 5% are underage. And where they are gambling underage, very little of that is online. I think it's about 2%, less than 2% is online. They're doing it with their parents' facilitation. So underage gambling, one, actually kids really are less and less interested in gambling today than they were 10 years ago. Two, very few children do it underage. And three, very small numbers of children would actually experience anything genuinely harmful. There's a figure banded around of 60,000 or 40,000 addicts, which is simply not true. Problem gambling rates for 16 and 17-year-olds in the health survey, which is a much better, the NHS official health survey, is zero. So this sort of attack on sponsorship and advertising, I appreciate it's annoying, a lot of the advertising, and some people may think it's inappropriate. But the suggestion that advertising is causing great harm to children is entirely fabricated. And the statistics which the Gambling Commission has access to do not support it. I'll say one more thing about the children's statistics, because often when this mythical 60,000 addicts is thrown about, this link is made to betting and online betting. We're told 60,000 addicts and it's all because of shirt sponsorship, because these children are betting online. It's simply not true. Where you've got these children who are not addicts but as classed as having some risky behaviours where gambling is concerned, the thing they're doing is lottery. That's the most popular thing they're doing. They're really not betting online. They're not playing in casinos. They're not going to bookies. They're playing cards with their friends and they're playing lotteries.
105,000, Dan. If you listen to Gambling with Lives, that figure is not 60,000, it's 105,000. In their most recent advertising that they've been putting out on Twitter, the number is nearly doubled.
I should say I would never criticise Gambling with Lives because I cannot conceive of what those people have gone through as parents. But I would say they're not the most rigorous in their fact checking. But these things, the whole myth around children and gambling is, again, it's these are entirely manufactured statistics. And the Gambling Commission knows they're untrue. But it sort of allows this narrative to take hold that somehow huge swathes of children are experiencing gambling disorder.
Dan, can you explain with the white paper when this gets released? What time frame does the industry have to respond? Are these measures, obviously they're not implemented straight away. Does it take time for these measures to be, have they got to be passed through Parliament? Can you explain to listeners that don't understand in terms of what chance has the industry got to respond after it's produced?
Well, there should be a consultation, but I think it could happen fairly quickly. And the government probably isn't interested in having another 16,000 responses it's got to wade through. So I imagine it might try to crack through as much of this as quickly as possible. And if the rumours are true, you see press reports about what's alleged to be in here, a lot of this can be done fairly quickly. Some measures may require secondary legislation, so that does involve Parliament's involvement. But we suspect quite a few, like affordability checks, we imagine that will get kicked to the Gambling Commission to run its own consultation on. And the issue with the Gambling Commission is that when it runs its consultation, they're fairly opaque. So they'll put out some questions, people will respond, and then the Gambling Commission will invariably say, we've run a consultation, we've listened to people's views, and we're going to do what we first thought of. And there's very little sort of ability to interrogate that and say, actually, have you made an evidence-based decision here, or was this consultation simply a bit of theatre that you felt you had to go through? So I think the big concern for me is not the white paper necessarily, but it's what the Gambling Commission decides to do next via the licence conditions and codes of practice. And there's a couple of things. They've got a vulnerability consultation that closed in January where they say that operators have to look out for vulnerable customers. But they've classified vulnerability in such broad terms that, so for example, you are vulnerable if you're a younger customer, but you're also vulnerable if you're an older customer. They don't give ages. You're vulnerable if you're dyslexic. You're vulnerable if you have higher levels of trust or risk for appetite. So they pretty much define every single person who gambles as being vulnerable. So we've got that consultation that closed and we're waiting for them to tell us what they're going to do. We've got another one on suicide reporting where operators will have to advise the Gambling Commission if anybody who has ever been a customer at all, whenever, dies by suicide. And the Gambling Commission will then investigate that. So that's the big thing, because government will forget about gambling after this white paper. They'll wash their hands of it and forget about it for another 20 years. The Gambling Commission won't. The Gambling Commission, if it continues to pursue this public health agenda, will gradually tighten the ratchet on the industry and on customers.
Worrying times from what you're saying. Geoff, I mean, coming back to you, what would you do as a company if the Gambling Commission have control over staking levels? Let's say they do actually commit to a pound, shilling and pence threshold. What comebacks have you got?
Well, they don't commit to any thresholds. Their regulation is littered with vague references to what you must do enough. They don't put a pounds figure on what level, for example, they consider an AML check to be. Andrew Rhodes will come on the television and disingenuously suggest that they would only enforce on large amounts of money and this kind of stuff. Oh, 240,000 this and 40,000 that. But they recently fined Vivaro for winning just £2,000 from a customer over a period of 3 months. So they are entirely disingenuous as an organization. And I believe current regulation as it stands is just a charter to fine operators. That's the way it's written. That's the way it stands. As soon as you turn around and say that you must listen to our speeches and you must pay mind to what we say and what we write and everything that we do, rather than saying these are your license conditions, these are what we require you to do, you know you have a problem. This is not regulation. This is basically a charter to fine operators. So long term, if the Gambling Commission pursues an agenda which drives operators into the black market, we will join them.
Do they investigate you regularly, or do they send?
They regulate people now. Regulation for many operators is done via Zoom call. Bother coming to your organization. They don't sit there as they used to do in the past, sit there and talk to you and discuss with you how you approach things. It's all done via Zoom call. Everybody that's ever been on a Zoom call knows what an imperfect system that is. They will come in and they will look at the people that you do business with the most, and with their charter to fine operators they will fine the major operators and they will suspend or close the licenses of smaller operators. That's the way they operate. Good
pod this, chaps. Some really good discussion. Just to finish the show, any other business, anything that you two would like to say to round it off?
My only concern, I've read recently that the major companies coming out with single customer view. Again, this is what one might term as unilaterally, but of course, they're all acting as one, the 3 or 4 companies involved. A single customer view, in my experience, is just yet another vehicle to drive the most vulnerable people, the people who cannot prove their ability to gamble with you. They don't have enough funds. The very first people who a single customer view might identify as being unable to afford to gamble, because it's a huge grey area, this kind of thing, this so-called affordability. But it is always the poorest people, it is always the most vulnerable people that will be picked up by any checks like that. And what happens to them, Lee? If you are a person who's gambled all your lives and you don't earn a lot of money, but you enjoy your gambling, you've never had to prove to anybody that you can afford it, I believe the poorest people, the most vulnerable people, will be inevitably driven to the black market. You do not stop people from gambling just by introducing laws, regulations, rules. People will not stop betting, and I'm genuinely concerned about measures like this literally being a vehicle for the black market which the Gambling Commission denies in importance. But to me, the first people driven there are the very people we should be looking to retain in the regulated market and protect them in the regulated market.
Indeed. And there is a big underestimation here from Public Health England that need reminding that gambling is also a very big social thing where people have come together. A lot of my friends throughout my life have come from this industry. I treasure the friends I've met. It's a fantastic social, just like a pub, really. The same thing. People like to enjoy a bet. People like to enjoy a drink and meet the friends down the pub. Same thing. Totally agree with that, Geoff. Just to finish for you, Dan, thank you for your bombshell on Public Health England's fudging of stats. We always like that on this show. Like we love to show the big concerns up. Anything from you to finish?
Yeah, well, I suppose it's just another bit of fudging of stats, but I wouldn't get too attached to, Geoff, the low problem gambling rate, because it's likely to go up. And the reason for that is that the Gambling Commission has decided to change the way that it measures problem gambling prevalence. So It is binning the National Health Service Health Survey, which has just been described as the gold standard of research, and introducing its own one. And it ran a pilot last year to test it, and that came out with a problem gambling rate of 1.3%. So we've actually demonstrated the Gambling Commission that their survey is technically wrong, but they've not responded yet. But Andrew Rhodes has said in the past that he wants the problem gambling rate to be higher. And he said at ICE that the problem gambling rate would change when the new survey count comes in. So I wouldn't get too attached to that. But again, it's just another example of how really this public health establishment of which the Gambling Commission is a part wants to be able to demonstrate widespread population level harm, because that then allows them to come in and do the things that they would like to do to this industry and to its customers.
And to the United Kingdom, to the people's rights. We talk about one last point. We are looking here, not we are, but politicians are looking to fundamentally change the rights and freedoms of people in the United Kingdom in a way that is totally unprecedented. Where does it go from here? People don't understand the dangers. I understand this is a huge topic, but I am just saying that what is being proposed here is an exceptionally dangerous state intervention into people's affairs. It doesn't just stop at gambling. Don't think it stops there. You go in there, you buy 2 donuts into Waitrose. In the future, you're paying on your debit card because you can't use cash anymore. And they say to you, no, sorry, you've already had your allocation of donuts this week. You're only allowed 1. This is where it all ends up when people like Ian Duncan Smith are the architects of our future.
Exactly. Thick politicians, Geoff, which you've also highlighted on many a time. What a great show that was. Now, I hope you're going to join us for part 2 of this after the white paper. Hopefully we'll get Geoff, Dan and Steve the Don on to chew the fat, because Steve the Don will tell it like it is. But a cracking show. Thank you to Dan for coming on. Been an absolute pleasure. And to you, Geoff. That's all from us. Bye for now.